All right, welcome to CBC Next, and today we're going to follow along with what we talked about on Sunday, which was Daniel chapter 6. What do you have for us today?
Well, I really enjoyed the message, first of all. You did a great job on Daniel chapter 6, as you have with all of these messages in Daniel. But the thing I'm really thankful about is how much time you spent before the actual Lion's Den event. Because to me, the primary theme in Daniel chapter 6, we always think of Daniel in the Lion's Den.
Right.
But to me, the primary theme are the things that led up to Daniel in the Lion's Den.
Sure, right.
And of course, that deals primarily with the character of Daniel. And you spent a good deal of time on that, how Daniel just continually rose to the top.
Right.
To the degree that he had a profound effect on two major governments.
Right.
He had a profound influence on the Babylonian government, and he had a profound influence on the Medes and the Persians.
Right.
By the time you get to Daniel chapter 6, he's in his late 80s, early 90s. And what's interesting to me is the way that they tried to find something that they could use against Daniel, and they were unable to, even after Daniel living that long.
Right.
I found something that I was going to share with you. Imagine that you, Phil, decided that you were going to run for president of the United States. And imagine that you became a viable candidate to the degree that the opposing party was worried about you. If I could kind of put in modern day terms what they did to Daniel, what they would do to you, Phil, is first of all, they would send an army of investigators to Clarksburg, West Virginia. They would examine in detail every tax return you've ever filed.
Right.
They'd talk to every person you've ever known. They'd pore over everything you've ever written. They'd scrutinize everything you've ever said. And a lot of that is on video.
Right, absolutely.
Because you're a pastor. They'd scrutinize everything that you've ever bought or sold. They'd scrutinize every bank deposit you've ever made. They would interrogate every friend you've ever had. They would look at every Google search you ever made, every website you've ever visited. And if possible, they would bug your phone and bug your office. And then, when they're done with you, they would do all of those things to your wife.
Right.
They would do all of those things to your children. They would do them to your parents. They would do them to your brothers.
Yeah, right.
That's what they did to Daniel in modern day terms.
Sure, right.
And they could not find one bit of indiscretion.
Right,
I mean,
absolutely.
here's a 90-year-old man, and they couldn't find one thing, not a single thing that they could use against him. Isn't that remarkable?
Absolutely. Well, now you see that in modern day where people will dig up old tweets that were in bad taste, maybe, or that seemed okay at the time, but in modern day, and over 90 years, you'd think there'd be some things like that. Oh, this was accepted back then, but in today's standards, we wouldn't do that. But man, they raked him over the coals, and what they decided they had to do was penalize him for praying too much.
Exactly. The only thing that they could find to use against him are those things concerning his faith, and even then they had to really make something up,
right? Absolutely.
And they had to flatter the king and make him God for a day,
right?
And so it's really amazing, the character of Daniel, and I'm so glad that you emphasized that, because to me that's the primary theme of Daniel chapter 6.
Right? Yeah, absolutely. And you just it to look at an example like that makes you nervous. Just like, oh man, how many, like you said, me sleeping under the basketball game.
Exactly. They'd use that against you because you've admitted it publicly.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And so,
and they'd find the things you haven't admitted to.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And even make things up.
Right. Yeah.
And so, I was thinking that as we look at the life of Daniel and as we look at his testimony, I was thinking about the things in Daniel's life that we need to emulate. And that's something else that you emphasize, is that we need to dare to be a Daniel.
Right.
And I jotted down just a few things. I got 4 things here. A consistent attitude.
Right.
A consistent faithfulness. A consistent testimony. And a consistent prayer life.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And, I don't know about you. When I read those things, I get convicted.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think I'm not a Daniel.
Right. That excellent spirit is one that really jumps out to me. I am a person that I like to do hard work, but I also kind of like to complain while I'm doing it. And it's just part of it. You know, if
Right.
I'm helping somebody move, oh, this is the word, I'm going to keep working. But that excellent spirit is something sometimes I can struggle with.
Can I tell you a quick story about that? Right after I got out of Bible college, I got a job as an assistant pastor. And our pastor bought a marquee sign to put out front. And it was a ground level marquee sign. We were on a very busy street, the busiest street of our little city. About 10,000 cars a day went past our church. And the pastor told me one day, he said, "You're in charge of the marquee sign, and I want you to think of something to put out on the sign every week." And so I thought, oh, okay, that's easy enough. And so I went out there one morning, and it was freezing cold. And I was putting on the marquee sign. The pastor at that time was doing a series on the family. And I was putting on the marquee sign, I was putting out there, Pastor continues series on the family. It was so cold, my hands were getting numb, and I had a terrible attitude. I did not have an excellent spirit. In my spirit, I was griping, and I was fussing, and I was complaining, and I was thinking to myself, 4 years of Bible college, and I'm out here in the cold putting letters on a marquee sign, and I have to admit, my attitude was terrible. Well, just a few months later, I was talking to a family that had come into our church, and they were just a very valuable family, a wonderful family that was a great blessing to our church. And I asked them, I said, "Well, you know, you folks live 30 minutes away. What in the world ever brought you to this church?" And they said, "Well, that's interesting." They said, "One day we just happened to be in town. We had come here to shop, and we were driving past the church, and we saw on your sign that the pastor was doing a series on the family. And at that time, we needed help with our family, and we were struggling, and we decided we'd come and visit." And I thought, oh, God forgive me. You know, the very thing that I was in my spirit complaining about is the very thing that God used to reach this family. So
and that's the big thing is we see Daniel just, you know, continuing to do the work. At times it seems like he, you know, rose in popularity. At other times it seems like, they've thought of him last in this group of people. And, you know, he just continually let God raise him and lower him and whatever God wanted to do. So, yeah, that's an excellent point.
And I think it's a principle throughout the scripture that God's the one that's in charge of promotion in every realm of life. Have you ever read, I think it's Psalm 65. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it's in Psalm 65, maybe around verse 3, where it says, "Promotion does not come from the east, does not come from the west, and it does not come from the south." And then the next verse says that it is God that puts them up, and it is God that takes them down. And of course, you notice that in that verse, north is not mentioned. And the reason, I think, is because the Bible talks about heaven being situated in the north. So it is implied that it is God that promotes. Promotion does not come from man. It doesn't come from now God will use men to promote you. But the promotion itself comes from God. And if and you know, our job is to just stay faithful, to work hard, to have a good testimony. It's God's job to promote us. And I've seen that in the lives, I've seen that in my life, and I've seen that in the lives of many, many other people. That even when man tries to push us down, it's like trying to push a beach ball underwater. You ever tried to push an inflated beach ball under the water? You can't do it. It always just pops right back up. And even when man tries to push us down, if our heart is right, if we have an excellent spirit and a good testimony and the things I just mentioned, then God's going to promote us, and no man can stop that.
I've seen also in the lives of people where they pushed and pushed and pushed for promotion, and sometimes that is the worst thing for them. There's a law in like leadership training and things like that. I think it's called like the law of Peter, where everybody rises to their level of incompetence, right? So you get promoted. That's
good. I love that. I've never heard that. That's
where
good.
You're not very good at your job anymore. And so, you know, I've seen pastors, you know, I got to leave this church and get a better church. And all of a sudden they're, you know, they neglect their family because the church is, you know, they're in over their head or things like that. And that's what I've tried to focus on is, God, I want to be right where you want me to be, and where I can, you know, be used in the way that you want me to be used. And, you know, however that pans out, I'm okay with, and I'm on board with it. So That's you see that in football too, where like a defensive coordinator gets promoted to head coach and lasts 1 year because
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And full disclosure, you're my son-in-law. But if I could just brag on you for a minute, I've seen this work in your life. In that, I've often heard it said that good leaders come from good followers. If you want to be a good leader, you first have to learn to be a good follower.
Right.
And I've seen you work in more than one circumstance as an assistant pastor. I've seen you work in at least 3 situations, one in Cape Girardeau, and then one in Georgia, and then one in LaGrange, at 2 places in Georgia, one in Savannah, and then one in LaGrange. And you were a faithful assistant pastor,
Right.
Never even really seeking promotion, but then God saw fit to open the door for this wonderful church, which I'm learning is one of the largest Baptist churches in West Virginia. And I know it's God that put you here. It was God that promoted you, and the reason is because I think you were a good follower. And so because you were a good follower, God has made you a good leader.
Right.
That's a principle that I think is taught throughout the Word of God.
Yeah.
All you have to do is look at the life of Joseph. How many times did man try to push him down?
Right. Yeah.
His brothers sold him into slavery. They tried to push him down. And then what happened? He became the head of Potiphar's house. He rose to the top like grain. Man pushed him down. God promoted him.
Right.
Then he got accused of a crime that he did not commit. Man pushed him down.
Right.
And then what happened? He was thrown in prison. He's in charge of the prison.
Right.
All of a sudden, God raised him up. Now he's prime minister of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh.
Right.
And no matter how much they pushed Joseph down, no matter how much men pushed Joseph down, God always raised him up.
Yeah.
And that gets back to promotion comes not from the east, not from the west, not from the south. Promotion comes from God. It's God that puts them up. It's God that takes them down. I think that's true in the business world. I think it's true in the church world. I think it's true in the political world.
Right. Yeah.
But I mentioned earlier that Daniel had a major influence on 2 major governments,
Right.
the Babylonian government and then the Medes and the Persians. And I really feel, and I don't remember if you touched on that. I listened to your message twice, and I still don't remember if you touched on this or not. But we really need to pray that in our political environment today, that God would raise up some men and women who dare to be a Daniel.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the biggest thing that I think reading through this is that I see is that Daniel never compromised.
Right.
And he worked together when he had to work together, and and didn't make a mountain out of a molehill.
And he wasn't abrasive.
Wasn't abrasive, but he had certain things that he would not cross.
That's right.
And absolutely, I think we would love, that would be a huge blessing to see God do that in our political realm. Absolutely.
Yeah, sometimes people say, well, we shouldn't try to get involved in governmental issues. And then they say, Jesus didn't try to overthrow the government, and Paul didn't try to overthrow the government. Our job is to just simply reach souls. But I think what they fail to understand is that they lived in the Roman Empire, which of course was a military autocracy, which with elements of a republic, but then it evolved into a full dictatorship. We live in a pure republic, which means the government is of the people, by the people, for the people. That means that even though our primary mission is to win souls and to build a church, the government and the condition of our government is going to determine how much freedom we have to do that. How much freedom are we going to have to operate within the realms of government without having to engage in civil disobedience? So there's no question about it. God has definitely not called me to be a politician. I have no desire to enter into politics whatsoever. But I do feel like we need to pray that God will raise up some men and some women who will dare to be a Daniel and have that kind of influence that Daniel had.
Even in local government, sometimes people, kind of act like that's not that important, but someone working a full-time job and being a council person, or just making sure that people are treated fairly and and right is done, and all those things make a huge difference in a community. And
it will. And I think one of the most important places where we would need believers would be on the school boards. Because the school boards, to a large degree, are going to determine what kind of curriculum our students are using. And I think that, we need to be salt and light. Right. We need to be salt that penetrates and light that radiates in all of these various areas.
And the other, on top of curriculum, things like Fellowship of Christian Athletes and Young Life and all these
whether or not they're even allowed to exist.
Which we're blessed to be able to do that kind of stuff. But we take that for granted.
That's right.
It might not always be that way.
Might not always be that way. That's right.
That's awesome.
Do you mind if I close with something I found, a song I found?
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you ever heard of P.P. Bliss? He was a famous hymn writer.
I have, yeah.
Okay. P.P. Bliss lived in the late 1800s. He was a famous hymn writer. Mm-hmm. And in 1873, actually it was just 3 years before his death, he wrote a hymn. And we never sang it at our church,
right.
But I found this online, and I thought it might be good to close with this. It's called Dare to Be a Daniel.
Oh, yeah. I think I have heard that.
Have you heard that?
Yeah.
It says, if I could just share this with our viewers,
sure, yeah.
It says, standing by a purpose true, heeding God's command. Honor them, the faithful few, all hail to Daniel's band. Hold the gospel banner high, on to victory grand. Satan and his host defy, and shout for Daniel's band. Dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone, dare to have a purpose firm, dare to make it known. Dare to be a Daniel.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's the challenge for us this week, is to dare to be a Daniel and to, stand firm in those places that we can't compromise, but to remember, like we talked about on Sunday, where Daniel's strength came from, which was constantly spending time with God, habitually finding places that he could call out to God and refocus on who is in charge and who is the Most High. Hey, we love you, church, and we hope to see you this Sunday. Daniel chapter 7 is when we get to start talking about Daniel's dreams. There's going to be all these different animals show up in a dream this Sunday, so be here this Sunday, and we look forward to seeing you there.